first step is to stay stitch the neckline. I'm using a 2.0 or 2.5 stitch length with a straight stitch and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to stay stitch the entire V neckline. Be careful not to let the neck stretch as you sew it. When you get to the point, you can take a stitch or two straight across before you pivot up the other side. After the stay stitching, you can press the stitches a bit around the neckline so that they're smooth. Use a little bit of steam. To get it all to lay flat. Then we're ready to work on the back neck. To stay stitch the back neck, we're going to stitch along the raw edge about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance with a stitch length of 2.5. Just a straight stitch. We'll give it a quick pressing before we finish the neck. Press the stay stitching in place. Make sure that there aren't any bumps or wrinkles, and then we'll go on to stitching the rest of the piece together. Next step is to close the left shoulder seam. Going to line up my seam allowances and use a narrow zigzag stitch with a width of 1.5 and a stitch length of 4.0. You can also serge these together if you prefer. Once we have the shoulder seam closed, then we can, not that one, this one. This is a Simplicity brand lace trim. It is 1 1/4 inches wide. So I'm just going to use this. I'm going to start from the other shoulder, and we'll pin it a little bit in place so you can see how it's going to work. I'm going to place the lace right up to the stay stitching line and put a couple of pins in it here. You can pin the whole thing if you like. I prefer to do it as I go along. I'm using the same zigzag stitch for applying the lace. This time I'm going to stitch right on top of the lace, right at the edge of the trim. If you use your presser foot to line up there's a mark in the center of your presser foot that you can line up with the edge of the trim. It'll make the stitching really easy. It'll go right at the edge of that lace. Don't run over your pins. Make sure you take them out as you go along. When you get to the center point of the V at the center front, you're going to put your needle down into the fabric and pivot a little bit to get around that corner. When you do that, it's going to make the lace have a little extra fabric right there. And we're just going to fold it down for the time being. We're going to come back and tack that when we're all finished. So I'm going to put my presser foot up and turn around the corner at the bottom. Continue up the other side. When you get to the shoulder, you want your seam to be facing the back of the garment. Continue stitching around the back. So I'm just lining up the lace with the stay stitching line. All the way to the shoulder, secure it. And then you can trim the lace, the extra lace off. Now we're going to go back to the center front and take care of this little extra bit of lace that we have. It's almost like a little dart right at the center front, and you're just going to zigzag those edges together. You want the lace to fit flat and smooth against the body here, so that's why we take in just this little dart. It's probably about half an inch that I'm overlapping. You can always take it in more if it's still bumpy, giving you too much fabric right there. So I'm just zigzagging along the edge of the top and down to the center front. Anchor it with a couple stitches and then cut the threads. You can see how that's going to be flat right there. You can trim your other threads off. Then we are ready to close the other shoulder. So with right sides together, Going to line up the other shoulder seam. And you want your lace edges to line up as well. If you want to pin it, you can. I like to try and match the pattern in the lace also, so it looks nice. And then we're going to stitch it with 5/8 inch seam allowance. Matching my raw edges here as I go. Okay, so this is what we have so far. On the gown, we have the front pretty much complete. Trim these extra threads off here. The next step will be the sleeve. So for the hem of the sleeve, we are using the same lace. So I'm going to put that under my machine here and grab my lace off the roll. Make sure you have the right side of the lace, which would be, in this case, is the lace side with a kind of a raised surface. So I'm going to overlap the lace about 1/4 inch and stitch it on with the same zigzag stitch. Once again, I am stitching at the very edge of the lace. Get to the edge of the arm, of the sleeve, we will anchor the stitches and cut the threads. Yeah, that's what the bottom of the sleeve will look like. And we'll do the other sleeve, the nightgown. So we're going to start with the notch at the top of the sleeve and find the notches at the back, which is the double notch. Make sure you get the sleeve in the right armhole. So it goes on the other side here. So we're putting right sides together. Going to line up the notch at the top of the sleeve cap with the seam at the shoulder and put a pin in there. And then I'm going to line up the notches in the armhole. The double notches go to the back of the garment. And match up the sleeve at the side seam, side armhole seam area as well. Okay, then I'm going to go towards the front of the gown and line up the notch in the front and match the front underarm seam to the side seam area of the underarm. Just a couple pins to hold it in place. Don't put too many pins in your armhole if you can help it. All right, now when I sew the arm in to the armhole, you always want to sew the arm with the sleeve on the bottom side so that the sleeve is facing down into the feed dogs of the sewing machine. The motion of the feed dogs will help ease the sleeve into the armhole. So I'm using again a 5/8 inch seam allowance, the same zigzag stitch. And I'm lining up my seam allowances here. The raw edges should be even. And if you're sewing across the shoulder seam, just push that shoulder seam toward the back of the garment. Secure the ends and trim anything that's left over there. All right, so that's how we put the sleeve in the armhole. The last step then on this side is to stitch from the bottom of the sleeve all the way down the side seam. And you want to line up the lace so that it's even. Put a pin in there. You want to keep the seams of the sleeve together. Make sure they're lined up. And then go down the side of the gown. All the way down the side. I'm not going to pin the whole thing. You can pin it if you want to. And then we're going to stitch it 5/8 of an inch. Make sure your raw edges are lined up. Anchor it at the bottom, back stitch a little bit, and cut your threads. After you finish sewing the garment, you can press the neck into shape. Use a little bit of steam. And press the sleeves as well. sure you press the lace so it's nice and smooth. If your lace is a little bit stiff, don't worry about it. It'll soften up after a couple of washings. Then we're going to move on to sewing the hem. To finish the hem of the nightgown, we will use some lace. This is flexi lace hem facing. It is 1 3/4 inches wide. It's very inexpensive and it's easy to find at your local fabric store. So we're going to start at the side seam of the gown. And we're going to overlap the lace 1/4 inch over the raw edge of the gown as before. And you want to start with the lace about 1/4 inch past the side seam, so that we have some room to overlap when we get to the other end, and I'll show you how that works. So I'm once again going to stitch close to the edge of the lace with a zigzag stitch. You can spend a lot of time pinning this on if you want to, but it's quite easy to keep straight and just line up as you go.
Just had a long call from my friend Anna.
To finish the end, when you get around to the other side, you're going to cut the trim about 1/4 inch past the side seam line. So just trim off the excess there and just fold the end under about 1/4 inch. And we'll continue zigzag stitching. Line up the edges of the trim so they match. When you get to the folded edge, leave your needle down in the fabric and pivot. Turn your fabric the other direction and then zigzag down to the edge of the hem. Zigzagging real close to the fold. And that's what it should look like. And then you can go back in and trim your ends. If you have extra fabric underneath here, you can trim the lace a little bit closer on the back side. That's how it should look. We'll give it a good pressing and then we'll add the bow. We'll just press the lace flat, give it a little bit of steam along the bottom edge. I put both the front and back edges together and do them at the same time. Press all along the bottom hem of the nightgown. other side. Then we're ready for the trim. Before I put the finishing bow on the center front, I want to make sure that the lace is a good fit and fits close to the chest. If there's a little bit of ply in the lace trim, you can overlap it just a little bit more at the center front so that it lays smoothly and is a good fit in the front. It depends on how it fits you. So you can change that a little bit if you need to. And then I buy these little packages of lingerie bows from the fabric store or Walmart. They come in different colors, and I just pick a bow that looks good. I think in this case I'll probably go with the darker blue. I'm going to stitch that at center front. You can stitch it on by hand, or you can use a sewing machine. I'm going to show you how to use the sewing machine to put it there. To tack the bow in place, you can use bar tack if your sewing machine has one. On my Husqvarna Viking, it's stitch number 32. Or you can use a regular zigzag stitch. We're going to line up the bow right underneath the needle. It's a little bit thick and heavy, so it might take a little bit of work to get it exactly where you want it to be. I'm going to put the tack right in the center of the flower. You could also tack either end just over the bow portion, but sometimes the bow falls apart if you do that. So I choose to tack it right smack in the middle of the flower. And I'm going to put my needle right through the center of it. Put my presser foot down and then just press start. It's just basically a zigzag stitch that kind of stays in one spot. And on my flower, it looks like it's part of the design. You don't realize that it's what's holding the flower in place. But that's it. That's the whole project.